MTG Scoundrels, it's in the cardboard. Ladies and gentlemen, scoundrels of all ages, welcome back to Modern Weekly. This week on the docket, we have Izzet Merfolk versus esperscam. Looks like keeping 6 here. Marsh Flats and Pass. Izzet Merfolk, of course, being one of the decks that came out of that Denver RC. That was pretty interesting. Here we go with the Steam Vents and Pass. Cracking the Marsh Flats here. On the end step. Esperscam, of course, tends to actually be 5-color, just based in Esper. Having access to leyline binding is very important. Yep, finding the Endothotriome here. Of course, leyline binding being the greatest Oblivion ring ever printed. Drawing a card for turn, playing a plains, passing. Looks like Polluted Delta fetching. Going down to 19, I would believe, to bring us to 19 all. Yep, getting the island there. Into a Silvergill Adept, revealing a Merfolk so they can draw a card. Oh, looks like didn't hit the third land here. The Izzet Merfolk player did, and goes to Tide Shaper. In this case, gets reprieved to draw a card to avoid getting the mana affected, and the Silvergill attacks for 2. There's the third land. Flooded Strand for turn. And passing. Island played. And there is another Tide Shaper. Targeting the Triome. And there's a Solitude. Either exiling the Ephemerate or also playing the Ephemerate, I believe. Exiling an Ephemerate. So, in response to that Tide Shaper targeting, must have in fact floated the mana. And there is the Voldaren Hexcatcher. This is a tough spot for the scam player. A lot of the time, you exile the white card, cast a Solitude. ETB, you target. Then you target it with the Ephemerate. specifically on the death trigger of the evoke. Alright, fetching here. Sometimes if you do that too early and do it in response to the ETB, that's where it gets you. Because you really want to get that ephemerate to hit right as another creature, or in this case, in response to a Voldaren Hexcatcher being cast. So you get the two creatures without it being able to sack Merfolk. Well, there's the Leyline Binding. So in response to the Hexcatcher being cast, and that is Voldalian Hexcatcher. Apologies for the mispronunciations. Hitting one of the Tide Shapers, I was targeting the land. The Tide Shaper is then being sacrificed to the Hexcatcher. To counter the Ephemerate. And thus the Solitude didn't have any more targets because originally it came in to hit one of the Tide Shapers and goes to the graveyard after the evoke, because the Ephemerate was in fact countered. Looks like cracking the Flooded Strand here, finding a Godless Shrine. Of course, after the earlier attack by the now 3/2 Silvergill Adept, thus bringing us to 19-10. Both players noting that as well. Alright, looks like evoking Muldrifter here to draw a couple cards. And attempting to Leyline Bind the Hexcatcher, sacking in response. Or sacking to counter it specifically. And passing. Tap Steam Vents. Attacking for 4 with a Mutavault and the Silvergill Adept. And playing a Grief here. But there's the revealed Merfolk Trickster from earlier. Tapping it, it loses all its abilities. Or at least tapping it in general, excuse me. But that's what would have done it. 3 creatures coming in the next turn. Game 1 goes to Izzet Merfolk. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys enjoy our content, please like and subscribe. Definitely let us know down in the comments decks you would like to see in the future. And if any of the locals are playing in, we'll gladly get it on the channel if we can. This matchup, esperscam probably bringing in a little bit more removal, especially at instant speed if they can. The Voldalian Hexcatcher, of course, can be a very tricky thing to try to play around, and sequencing is everything. Izzet Merfolk probably bringing a little bit more interaction. Of course, Izzet Merfolk is known as Izzet Merfolk because of Flame of Anor, which was one of the more powerful cards to get printed out of Lord of the Rings. And as always, you can find deck lists in the description below, as well as timestamps to move on to the next game a little bit faster. Turns out a lot of the merfolk are incidentally wizards, which lets you choose 2 of the 3 modes when you cast it. Now the esperscam list does give you a little bit more card draw thanks to Mulldrifter, which turns out targeting a Mulldrifter with your Ephemerate lets you draw 6 cards, because in ETBs you draw 2, you Ephemerate it, you draw 2 more. And then if you hit the rebound on the next upkeep, you draw 2 more cards. So it's quite the way to refill the hand. And of course, being that this list somewhat came from Aspiring Spike, you have access to Shadow's Prophecy, which is another reason to essentially run 5-color with the base of Esper, as it lets you get a little bit more card selection and advantage as well. Also, wouldn't be surprised if the esperscam player brings in things like a couple of sweepers out of the board. Supreme Verdict probably pretty good here, as long as they're willing to sandbag it. But the merfolk player probably expecting that. Start game 2 here. Godless Shrine, taking 2. Into Thoughtseize, taking 2 more. Bringing us to 20 to 16. Looks like a couple of Flame of Anors, Aether Vial, Master of the Pearl Trident, and 3 lands. Taking the Aether Vial, not a bad idea here. Try to limit what the merfolk deck can do in terms of double spelling. Marshflat's played. Misty Rainforest on the board for the Izzet Merfolk player. Looks like cracking it. Going to 19, finding a tapped Steam Vents. And there is the Master of the Pearl Trident. Cracking on end step. Finding one of the triomes. course, it isn't exactly a triumph, but it's one of the lands with 3 basic land types that you can go fetch. There's a prismatic ending to deal with the Master of the Pearl Trident. Not a bad answer here. Land go. Once again, missing the 3rd land drop. Unfortunate. There's an island off the fetch of the Misty Rainforest for the Merfolk player. Casting Flame of Anor, drawing 2 cards, untapping, drawing. Playing the Polluted Delta. Casting the Mistcaller. And looks like trying to target the Mistcaller with the Leyline Binding, but oh well, look at there. Tishana's Tidebinder. The stifle of the format. Really has helped make this Izzet Merfolk deck and Merfolk in general become even more interactive. And there's another Leyline Binding. In this case, sacking the Mistcaller. Voltaren Hexcatcher, attacking for 4. And finally, there is the 3rd land. A couple turns too late, more than likely. There's the Solitude, exiling the Teferi Time Raveler. Targeting the Hexcatcher. It will get exiled. And there is a Persist. Targeting the Solitude. But there is the 2nd Flame of Anor that we learned about earlier. Dealing damage to the Solitude, still exiling the Tidebinder. Playing the Polluted Delta. Cracking it, losing a life. Finding another island. Bringing us to 20-9 after all that life gain. There's the Tideshaper. Attacking in for 2 with the Mutavault. And another Tideshaper. That's how Merfolk does it. Cutting off the white source is pretty important here. There's a Grief, exiling a Shadow's Prophecy, revealing 2 lands. Don't think there's a way out of this one, but passing the turn. Cracking to draw a card there on the Horizon land. Attacking for 6, going to 1. There's the solitude, exiling the ephemerate, and that won't be enough. Game, set, match to Izzet Merfolk. Thank you all so much for watching. Tune in next week for another episode of Modern Weekly here at MTG Scoundrels. Please like and subscribe, be a friend, tell a friend, and we'll see you all next week.